Exploring food. What makes it grow? How does it give us energy?
Let's begin with a very familiar moment. You're eating. Not in a hurry, nothing unusual happening, and then, in your head, a question pops up very childish, yet also very human. Where does the food I eat actually go? Science often begins with questions like that. Imagine you could shrink yourself down small enough to travel inside your own body. The moment the first bite of food touches your mouth, the story begins. Teeth are not just for biting. They grind, tear, and break food into smaller pieces so the body has less work to do later. Saliva is not just to make food wet. It contains enzymes, starting digestion from the very first second, even before you swallow. When the food slides down your throat, you don't have to think about how to push it down. Rhythmic waves of muscle contractions in the esophagus do the job for you. You give no commands. You simply live. The body handles the rest. Then comes the stomach, a true muscular chamber. It doesn't passively soak food. It churns, compresses, and bathes it in strong acid and enzymes. Here, everything is turned into a thick, semi-liquid mixture, not pretty, not poetic, but extremely effective. Science doesn't need to be beautiful. It needs to be correct. That mixture is gradually pushed into the small intestine. This is where the most delicate work happens. The intestinal walls are covered with tiny villi, like millions of invisible hands, quietly absorbing individual nutrients into the bloodstream. You feel nothing, but every cell in your body is being fed. What remains, what the body doesn't need, moves on to the large intestine. Water is reabsorbed. Waste is formed. And then, in a very natural way, the body completes the cycle. No drama, no noise. The insight is here. The digestive system does not work according to your will. It works according to biological rhythm. The more you respect that rhythm, eating slowly, eating when hungry, resting after meals, the more smoothly it runs. But the story doesn't stop at the stomach. There are nights when you fall asleep and suddenly drop into a nightmare. Your heart races. Images twist and distort. The fear feels real. You wake up and wonder, what is wrong with my brain? In reality, your brain isn't attacking you. It's training you. Dreams are where the brain organizes memories. Nightmares happen when stress, anxiety, and unresolved fears mix into that process. The brain creates dangerous scenarios not to torture you, but to rehearse reactions. That is survival, not randomness. Then there's another reflex everyone has experienced. Coughing. A single grain of dust is enough to make your chest explode with force. Not because you're weak, but because the airway is a no-error zone. Tiny cilia, sensitive nerves, and the brain coordinate in a split second to create a blast of air powerful enough to eject the intruder. Coughing is protection, not malfunction. And if we zoom out beyond the human body, science tells the same story with the Earth itself. Dinosaurs didn't disappear because of a single asteroid. It was a chain reaction. Impact, dust blocking sunlight, plants dying, food chains collapsing, volcanic eruptions, climate shifts. Nature doesn't collapse in an instant. It collapses when multiple systems cross their tolerance limits at the same time. So what is the biggest insight of this entire story? From the stomach, to the brain, to the lungs, to the planet itself, systems work quietly and persistently, and only speak up when there's no other option. When the body coughs, vomits, or sends nightmares, it's not betraying you. It's telling you that you've drifted out of rhythm. If this video makes you look at your body differently, not with fear, but with curiosity, leave a comment. It doesn't have to be long. Just one sentence. I'm starting to listen to my body more, because science, in the end, isn't meant to make you smarter. It's meant to help you live more in harmony with yourself. If you take one more step into a deeper layer of science, you'll notice a common thread that is cold, yet deeply human. The body and the brain do not care whether you are busy, whether it is convenient, or whether it is the right time. They only care whether the system is still operating safely. In physiology, there is a concept called homeostasis. Simply put, it is the state of balance the body constantly tries to maintain. Stable temperature, stable pressure, stable biological rhythms, digestion, sleep, the cough reflex, dreams, all of them are tools to preserve that balance. When you eat too quickly, homeostasis is disrupted. The stomach doesn't have enough time to send fullness signals to the brain. When you stay up late repeatedly, the brain no longer has sufficient time to process memories and emotions. When you inhale dust, the airway treats it as a direct threat to oxygen, the most critical resource for life. And when sunlight is blocked on Earth, the entire biological energy chain collapses. Science shows that the more complex a system is, the more it depends on rhythm rather than strength. You don't need to eat a lot to be healthy. The brain doesn't need to think harder to be smart. The lungs don't need to endure to be strong. They need the right rhythm. Digestive research shows that simply eating about 10 to 20% more slowly allows the brain to receive satiety signals significantly earlier, reducing overload on the stomach. In sleep, brain imaging studies show that when daytime stress increases, emotional processing areas become more active during dreams, raising the frequency of nightmares. With coughing, physiology shows that the reflex is so fast you don't have time to decide because the brain has already classified it as an emergency. A very real insight lies here. The body does not wait for you to understand science before protecting you. It protects you first, explains later. Modern life, however, reverses this order. We demand performance first, then deal with the damage later. We rush meals to get back to work. We force ourselves to stay awake to finish tasks. We suppress coughing to avoid embarrassment. We dismiss nightmares as trivial. And when the body reacts strongly, we act surprised. What very few science videos say directly is this: most minor health problems are not caused by a lack of knowledge, but by a lack of listening. You know, eating slowly is good. You know enough sleep is necessary. You know clean air matters. But your rhythm of life pushes you to act against that knowledge, day after day. When you connect all these stories from food moving through the gut, to dreams in the brain, to the cough reflex in the lungs, to the collapse of a massive ecosystem, you see the same rule. Every system can tolerate small deviations, but not prolonged ones. The final insight, and the one that keeps viewers watching, is this: the human body is like a miniature Earth. It doesn't break because of one meal, one sleepless night, or one cough. It breaks when you repeatedly treat small signals as insignificant. Science does not ask you to live perfectly. It only reminds you to live a little more in rhythm. And perhaps the deepest connection between this video and the viewer happens at the moment they realize you don't need to change your entire life today. You only need to start with one very small action, listening to your body one beat earlier. There are moments in everyday life, small, ordinary ones that, when viewed through a scientific lens, look like living experiments the body runs on its own every day. First example, a familiar dinner. You don't eat too much. You don't eat anything unusual, but you eat while scrolling on your phone, replying to messages, thinking about tomorrow's work. The body enters the meal in a scattered state. Science calls this a mild stress response. When stress appears, the sympathetic nervous system becomes more active, slowing intestinal movement and reducing digestive enzyme secretion. Food still goes in, but it isn't processed smoothly. The result is bloating, belching, discomfort. Not sharp pain, just enough to feel that something is off. The body isn't malfunctioning. It's simply working under the wrong conditions. Second example, fragmented sleep. You go to bed on time, but your mind refuses to shut down. News, worries, unfinished conversations. The brain remains on alert. When you sleep, instead of entering deep rest, the brain is pulled into chaotic dreams. Nightmares appear not because you're weak, but because the brain is trying to process too much emotional data at once. Sleep research shows that the brain needs safety and repetition to create calm dreams. When those are missing, it switches into warning mode. Third example, A coughing fit in a familiar space. Not toxic smoke, not illness, just air conditioning, dry air, very fine dust. The cilia in the airway detect something abnormal. They don't distinguish between big danger or small danger. Any deviation is enough. The brain immediately triggers the cough reflex. You cough, feel embarrassed, try to suppress it. But biology doesn't care about politeness. When the airway is threatened, the reflex must happen. Fourth example, nameless fatigue at the end of the day. You didn't do heavy labor. You're not sick, but by evening, your body feels heavy, your mind feels empty, food doesn't taste good. This is a sign of a disrupted circadian rhythm. Artificial light, screens, late meals, and irregular schedules suppress melatonin. The brain doesn't receive the signal that the day is ending. The body doesn't know when to recover. Fatigue here isn't a lack of energy, it's a lack of rhythm. Final example. Children and adults react differently. Children stop eating when they're full. They sleep when they're sleepy. They lie down when they're tired. Adults are different. Adults learn to ignore signals. And that's why adults vomit less than children, but suffer more chronic digestive problems. Fewer nightmares, but more daytime anxiety. Fewer strong reflexes, but more prolonged exhaustion. The blunt insight here is this. The body doesn't become more difficult with age. We simply become worse at listening. These examples aren't meant to scare you. They're meant to show something very practical. Most mild disturbances in modern life don't come from disease, but from a lifestyle rhythm that runs ahead of biological adaptation. Once you understand that, science stops being distant theory. It becomes a very simple invitation. Eat a little more slowly, sleep a little earlier, pause before the body is forced to make you stop. And it's these small adjustments that keep this complex system running steadily, day after day, without needing major warning signals. There is a very interesting moment that often happens when viewers reach this part of the video. They stop listening with their ears. They begin to examine themselves. They recall days of perfectly normal eating that always ended with discomfort. Nights of full sleep that still led to exhaustion in the morning. Dry coughs with no clear cause. Dreams that repeated the same familiar tension. And for the first time, those fragments begin to connect into a story that actually makes sense. Science calls this delayed awareness. The body has been speaking for a long time, but consciousness only understands once a clear enough framework appears. Take a very practical example, the rushed breakfast. Many people aren't hungry, yet still eat because breakfast is necessary. The body isn't ready. Enzymes aren't fully active, but food goes in anyway. The result isn't immediate pain, but a lingering sluggishness throughout the morning. The brain lacks stable glucose. Stress hormones rise slightly. You drink more coffee. Coffee doesn't solve the problem. It simply pushes the nervous system higher, and the loop begins. Or another example, continuous mental work without breaks. The brain consumes enormous amounts of energy. When it doesn't get short rests, it switches to a conservation mode. The signs aren't severe headaches, but loss of focus, irritability, and mental friction. Many people think this is personality, but physiology calls it signal overload in the brain. Another example that often goes unnoticed. Eating but never feeling full. Not because of insufficient food, but because satiety signals need time to travel from the gut to the brain. When you eat too quickly, you pass the threshold before the brain receives the message. Fullness arrives late, often accompanied by discomfort. And you wonder why you can't stop eating. The crucial insight here is this. The body does not operate according to the logic of schedules, but according to the logic of biological time. Society teaches us punctuality. Biology teaches us rhythm. The two rarely align perfectly. The problem isn't that you're living wrongly, it's that you're living in a rhythm that biology was never designed for. And here is the point that keeps viewers watching the longest. You don't need dramatic changes, no perfect diet, no ideal lifestyle. Science shows that simply reducing rhythm mismatch allows the body to self-correct remarkably well. Eat a little more slowly. Sleep a little earlier. Pause when discomfort first appears, instead of waiting until exhaustion. These things sound small, but biology always changes cumulatively. Each time you listen a little earlier, the body doesn't have to resort to strong signals like vomiting, violent coughing, burnout, or nightmares. And perhaps what makes this video connect so deeply isn't the information, but this realization: your body has never been working against you. It has only been trying to keep you alive in a rhythm it was never designed for. If viewers stay until this point, they are no longer watching a science video. They are watching themselves, explained through the language of biology. So let's close this story with something very clear, so that when the video ends, viewers don't turn it off immediately, but sit with their own body for a few more seconds. From food moving through the gut, to dreams in the brain, to a cough in the chest, or even the collapse of an ancient world, science points to one very direct truth. The body and nature never react randomly. They react only when limits are crossed. Vomiting, coughing, nightmares, fatigue, loss of appetite, difficulty concentrating. These are not failures. They are the final languages used when earlier whispers were not heard. The most important question isn't why does the body do this, but this: how long have you been living in a state that is just enough to endure, but not enough to be well? Science doesn't ask you to live perfectly. It only reminds you of something very modest. When you respect biological rhythm just a little more, the body no longer has to use painful signals to pull you back. If after this video you eat one meal more slowly, go to bed one night a little earlier, or stop a little sooner before exhaustion, then science has done its job. And if you've ever noticed your body speaking in familiar ways that you simply never paid attention to before, leave a comment. Not to list symptoms, but to mark a very small yet very important moment. The moment you begin to listen. Instead of just endure,